I've realised that no one really knows the most effective way to start anything off. I'll prove it because I wasn't so sure how to start this video, since I'm supposed to be talking about when video games put their best moments at the start and are unable to keep up the momentum they gain from that throughout the rest of the game. So this intro needs to be really good, doesn't it? I can do that. Yeah, that'll do. I think it's interesting how there's roughly 2 million separate proverbs and phrases relating to starting something off in the right way. So you got stuff like start as you mean to go on and starting off on the right foot, but you've also got crap like the light that burns twice as much, it only burns for half as long, whatever the hell that is, but it implies that nobody really knows what they're doing or talking about. And that's good, because I can relate to that. Because every instinct and small nugget of knowledge about game design will tell you to pay particular attention to a game's opening level. Since we're talking about proverbs and sayings, first impressions are very important. If you want someone to play a game for longer than 15 minutes, you absolutely have to make the start of the game worth playing. But you can go too far. You can put all the fun stuff at the start and have nothing else for the rest of the game. Probably don't want to do that. It's fine, no one plays video games for more than a few hours these days. Persona 5 over here with 100 hours of game just to reach the end? That's way too reasonable. Within the last 12 months, I don't think I've played a game that has left as much of an impact on me as Doki Doki Literature Club. Bear in mind that in that time we've had genre-defining offerings like Super Mario Odyssey and Cuphead, so for any game to leave more of a lasting impression on me than those games, it has to be something a little bit special. I wouldn't say that Doki Doki Literature Club is better than either of those, but it doesn't have to be. There is more than one way a game can create memorable moments. So this is your standard dating sim full of anime girls where you tailor the poetry you write to impress the girl of your choice. And even with the Steam page having a tag of psychological horror, I was naive enough to think that this is all there was to DDLC. I mean, I wasn't really. You can't have a bunch of people telling you to play this innocent dating sim without gradually becoming suspicious. At some point, all hell's gonna break loose, I just know it. And to be fair, it keeps up the facade for a decently long time. You definitely get the sense that Doki Doki Literature Club is waiting for that trigger point so that it can open the gates of hell without thinking twice, but it certainly doesn't rush towards that moment. Hey, do you want a quick lesson on how to use video games to elicit an emotional response from the player that is relevant to the overarching theme of the narrative? It's very simple, actually. You get them to sit through 3.5 hours of a boring dating sim while still finding time to make the characters endearing and give a frighteningly accurate portrayal of depression, and then the suicide happens. I miss the happy music. Honestly though, if Doki Doki Literature Club was to have a dramatic shift in tone and grounding, I am at least a little bit glad that it came from something so real. Sayori's suicide off the back of a lengthy, authentic discussion about depression was enough to give me some serious pause. Can't say I've seen something like this very often in a game before. The only problem is that this transition from one style of a game to another comes as the natural peak within Doki Doki Literature Club. It's well executed, it's surprising, and it signals a change to something far crazier and harder to understand. After this, the game starts glitching out and characters start mutilating themselves, but you can kind of see it coming. When one of them hangs themselves, you are significantly more defensive and on guard for the second half of the game. As a result, DDLC never surpasses Sayori's suicide and is never able to shock the player in quite the same way. It's not a bad thing, and it doesn't make the second half of DDLC bad by any means, but I kinda wish it kept surprising. In like, a fun way, maybe. I think that was always likely to be an issue in a game that undergoes such a dramatic change in perspective based on one particular event, if just because Sayori's death has 3 hours of build-up to it. The fact that the game before that was kinda dull becomes justified, but there's no singular moment after that that has the same amount of build-up and is given the same amount of treatment. It's not bad, but it's not as horrifying. When I've previously talked about video games that do a great job of introducing the player to the kind of game they can come to expect, I've neglected to mention how that can ironically work against your best interests. An exciting opening followed closely by a crap ton of exposition doesn't do a ton to convince anyone that they've bought the right video game. It's like a cold open in film. There's a danger that front-loading the action is writing a check that everything else can't cash. The second Uncharted game needed something at the start to instantly grab the player's attention and to up the ante somewhat from the first game. Kind of a that was good, but check this shit out. What you end up with is one of the best opening levels in the history of video games. There are genuinely few better ways of getting someone on board with a video game than putting them in control of a groggy, bloodied Nathan Drake clinging to a ruined train that is hanging off the side of a snowy mountain. For once, it feels less like a climbing simulator where you're just passively holding a direction on the control stick, and more like you're in imminent danger of falling to your death at any moment as the train falls apart around you. Now, I like Uncharted 2 quite a lot, but apart from a mostly enjoyable train level later on, which, yes, is the same exact train, Uncharted 2 never gets this good again. I think back to what I enjoyed about this game, and almost everything operates at like an 8 out of 10. But that first chapter is a comfortable 10 out of 10 that is never topped at any point in this game. I'm very glad it's here, but I can't help but be just a wee bit disappointed that inside 15 minutes you've seen the best that Uncharted 2 can offer you. Especially since after that you're doing the stupid stealth mission shortly after, and there's no trains here. Fighting a losing battle over here. It's hard for any game to be consistently exciting. You'll always end up with periods of downtime that you have to wade through in order to get back to the action, and it's more a case of how lethargic things get away from the excitement. Or just stupid. Everything could just be a little bit stupid. You see, you'd have a hard time making a video game about lawyers and the legal system and making it enthralling without doing some stupid shit from time to time, and this is a philosophy that Ace Attorney follows religiously. I guess they're technically visual novels, which gives you a fairly clean slate for creativity that you can run buck fucking wild with, but I appreciate the stance that it took to ensure that you're always engaged with whatever case you're having to deal with at the time. The original Phoenix Wright trilogy is a super solid collection of games that are ultimately very similar to one another, but all of them manage to keep the quality fairly high throughout, regardless of whatever ridiculous shit is placed in front of you. For the fourth game, Capcom leapt forward 7 years in-game and put Phoenix Wright's apprentice in the hot seat. If you're changing playable characters for a game, it might be a good idea to start the game on a positive note. And they did that! The start of Apollo Justice is genuinely one of the best cases in the whole franchise. You're introduced to your mentor, Hobo Phoenix Wright, who has been accused of killing a guy who he lost a poker match to, and now that Phoenix Wright is off doing his own thing in this game, he dominates every conversation he's a part of with his snarky demeanor. It's fairly straightforward because it's the first case in the game, but it's mostly there to introduce you to Apollo Justice and this new version of Phoenix Wright. The slight issue is that over the course of the game that comes after this, Apollo never really grows as a character and Phoenix almost feels like comic relief at points. The game never progresses with the kind of confidence that you'd think it would do based on the first case. I guess the last case isn't so bad, but the second one, called Turnabout Corner, is bizarrely complicated with way too much going on to be able to focus on one particular thing. Hobo Phoenix gets hit by a car and that's about as interesting as it gets. Other than this guy's penis hair, that's pretty entertaining too, I guess. In my mind, where all the fun stuff happens, you should be able to gauge the consistency of a game through using graphs. Yeah, it sounds kinda boring in theory, but I think it might be a more effective way of demonstrating visually the different ways in which momentum can affect how fun certain parts of a game are. So you make the start of the game engaging and ideally the end as well, but maybe you have a bunch of smaller peaks in between to tie the player over. This whole video is about games that look more like this, so you have a peak at the start and then everything deflates like a leaky balloon. Far Cry 3 differs somewhat because you can split that game in half and end up with two completely different ways of structuring a revenge story against some piece of shit bad guy. One of them is good, one of them is stupid and bad and makes me feel sad. When I say that Far Cry 3 peaks too soon, it isn't actually all that soon at all. The best cutscenes aren't until a few hours in, and the base game behind it is very solid basically all the way to the end. The problem is that the big bad guy dies too soon, and then the game tries to hold everything together after that, and it doesn't do a very good job of that. It's a testament to the first half of Far Cry 3 that what transpires in that time is good enough to lift the overall game to some pretty lofty heights. At least since the third game, this franchise has worked really hard on creating menacing villains that steal every scene they show up in, and Vaas might just be the best of the lot. He's the source of all your problems, so you hate him for that, but he's also endlessly entertaining and the only character in the game who has a personality, so that's a bonus. You kill him in a cutscene, which is a bit of a letdown, but not as much as the game continuing after this. It's like you're drawing a circle, and just as you're around to closing the loop, you go off on a complete tangent and have the player go do some other stupid shit instead. There's another villain and further attempts to warp the protagonist's mind with promises of power and the boobs of native women, and I kind of don't care. Sometimes you've got to take a step back and realize that telling a more in-depth short story is better than stretching things out for another 6 hours. At least Ubisoft learned for the games that came after. Or I hope they did. I haven't beaten Far Cry 5 yet, so I guess there's time for them to fuck it up. I will brace myself. I was playing Sea of Thieves recently and a thought occurred to me. Why do I enjoy playing this game? It's open-ended with very few boundaries in place to restrict where you can go, and there isn't much in the way of structure to guide you on what you should be doing next. You sail around a bit, blow up some enemy pirates, maybe pick up some treasure, and repeat all of that many times. If I was to make a graph for it, it'd probably look like this, but hang on a sec, because the highlights of Sea of Thieves are blowing up the other players and finding the gold, both of which are under your control. You make the peaks while playing Sea of Thieves, and it gives you the kind of fulfillment that keeps you going. It's at this point that I'm reminded that people sometimes compare this game to No Man's Sky, which is weird for two reasons. For one, the multiplayer makes a huge difference in Sea of Thieves, and two, No Man's Sky has one peak at the beginning and you're not involved in any way. I sometimes feel like I'm being too harsh on No Man's Sky, since a lot has been changed and added to the game since I last played it like 15 months ago, but you don't usually get a second chance at a first impression. Incidentally, my first impressions of No Man's Sky were great, and I feel the game handles its massive scope very nicely for about 2 hours. They plunk you down on some random planet with a busted spaceship and you're told to do some exploring so you can find enough materials to fix it, and continue onwards in your conquest of fucking everything. You end up in space, hopping from planet to planet, pillaging resources and swindling random aliens, and it runs out of steam really quickly. For a game that was promoted as this ridiculous adventure game, the fact that you move past this sense of wonderment with every discovery so quickly is an impossible situation to come back from. I know No Man's Sky has had updates that have attempted to fix things, but no update in the world can fix how bland things get after such a short time. Sometimes you need a bit more variety. This is RabbidLuigi, and I think this whole video is all about games that lose the power to surprise way too soon. It's probably not something you think about very often, but I guarantee that is one of the reasons why you like certain games over others. That being said, I probably should get back to No Man's Sky at some point, just to see if the updates have made it better in any way. Who knows? I could find something I enjoy about the game. That'd be a surprise. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.